Simon & Schuster Audio presents Countdown, how our modern world is threatening sperm counts, altering male and female reproductive development, and imperiling the future of the human race. By Shauna Swan, Ph.D., with Stacy Colino. Read by Cynthia Farrell.
Prologue. It's hardly a newsflash that human beings often take things for granted. Fertility is no exception, unless people discover they have a problem in this area. As with having access to basic necessities and certain fundamental freedoms, many people take it as a given that they'll be able to have babies when the time is right and help perpetuate the species. All of these assumptions reside under the notion that we don't always appreciate what we've got till it's gone, as folk singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell suggested in her hit song Big Yellow Taxi. It's difficult enough for a man or a woman, when experiencing reproductive disorders or fertility troubles, to accept that he or she may not be able to have children. Now there's an even greater challenge as human beings collectively are forced to contend with some dismaying biological realities. In Western countries, sperm counts and men's testosterone levels have declined dramatically over the last 4 decades, as my own research and that of others has found. Also, increasing numbers of girls are experiencing early puberty, and grown women are losing good quality eggs at younger ages than expected. They're also suffering more miscarriages. It's no longer business as usual when it comes to human reproduction. Other species are suffering too. There's been a rise of abnormal genitals in wildlife, including unusually small penises in alligators, panthers, and mink, as well as an increase in fish, frogs, birds, and snapping turtles that have both male and female gonads or ambiguous genitalia. At first glance, these issues may seem like bizarre anomalies or cruel tricks from Mother Nature, but they're all signs that something very wrong is happening in our midst. Exactly what that culprit is continues to be hotly debated, but evidence pointing to likely suspects is mounting on a regular basis. This much is clear. The problem isn't that something is inherently wrong with the human body as it has evolved over time. It's that chemicals in our environment and unhealthy lifestyle practices in our modern world are disrupting our hormonal balance, causing varying degrees of reproductive havoc that can foil fertility and lead to long-term health problems even after one has left the reproductive years. Similar effects are occurring among other species, adding up to widespread reproductive shock. Simply put, we're living in an age of reproductive reckoning that is having reverberating effects across the planet. If these alarming trends continue unabated, it's difficult to predict what the world will look like in 100 years. What does this dramatic decline in sperm count portend if it stays on its current trajectory? Does it signal the beginning of the end of the human race? Or that we're on the brink of extinction? Does the environmental emasculation of wildlife suggest that the Earth really is becoming much less habitable? Are we on the verge of experiencing a global existential crisis? These are good questions, and we don't have clear answers to them, at least not yet. But pieces of the puzzle are being put together, as you'll see in the chapters that follow. You'll learn more about the breadth of these scary declines in sperm counts and other aspects of reproductive function, as well as the factors that are likely to blame for these unfortunate effects in human beings and other species, based on scientific research. The following is clear. The current state of reproductive affairs can't continue much longer without threatening human survival. Current levels of sperm counts and concentrations and decreased fertility are already posing serious threats to Western populations, on both ends of the human lifespan. Infertility is linked to an increased risk of certain diseases and earlier death in both men and women, while leading to a decrease in the number of children born over time. Obviously, this isn't a healthy scenario for Homo sapiens, or for other threatened or endangered species. Already, some countries with problematic age distributions are grappling with shrinking populations, with increasing numbers of older people being supported by fewer younger people. It's a fairly bleak picture, I admit, but it's an important one to be aware of because, unless we take steps to reverse these harmful influences, the planet's species are in grave danger. Right now, the important measures that might improve the situation aren't happening. The 2017 publication of my meta-analysis on sperm count decline in Western countries put this issue on the radar screen, grabbing headlines and television coverage around the world. But the findings haven't translated into committees being formed, environmental policies being changed, safer chemicals being manufactured, or other concerted efforts being made to address the suspected causes or protect our collective future. Some people are in denial about the reality and gravity of the issue, and others shrug it off, saying the Earth is overpopulated. Others acknowledge the sperm count decline and the likelihood of a stagnation or decline in global population in the near future, but even they don't engage in much more than hand-wringing. In some ways, the sperm count decline is akin to where global warming was 40 years ago, reported upon but denied or ignored. Sometime between the 2006 release of Al Gore's Oscar-winning documentary An Inconvenient Truth and now, the climate crisis has been accepted, at least by most people, as a real threat. My hope is that the same will happen with the reproductive turmoil that's upon us. Increasingly, scientists are in agreement on the threat. Now we need the public to take this issue seriously. As a leading researcher on reproductive health and the environment, I feel it's my duty to draw attention to these alarming changes to sexual development and function. My interest in the effects of environmental factors on reproductive health started in the 1980s, when I investigated a cluster of miscarriages in Santa Clara County, California, a trend that was eventually tied to toxic waste from a semiconductor plant that had leaked into the community's drinking water. Gradually, I became increasingly interested in investigating the potential effects that environmental chemicals can have on reproductive, sexual, and gender-related development in men, women, and children. Over the last 30 years, I've conducted studies on everything from the origins of genital anomalies in newborns and the influence of prenatal stress on reproductive development in offspring, to the effects of many hours of TV watching on testicular function, the connection between high exposure to chemicals called phthalates and low interest in sexual activity, and many other subjects related to reproductive health. Reversing the various reproduction sabotaging effects that we're living with will require fundamental changes, including sweeping modifications to the kinds and volumes of chemicals that are manufactured and pumped into the environment. To make this happen, significant political and economic challenges will need to be overcome, a prospect that's daunting but urgently needed, in my opinion. Still, I believe this can be accomplished. That's where this book comes in. In Part 1, you'll learn more about the changes that are happening to reproductive and sexual development among humans and other species. Part 2 takes a detailed look at the sources of these shifts, namely, the environmental, lifestyle, and sociological factors that are contributing to these trends. And Part 3 explores the ripple effects the shifts are having on long-term health and survival. In Part 4, I will guide you towards smart ways to protect yourself and your unborn children, as well as other steps you can take to help remedy what threatens both human and animal species. It's time to get started on altering these alarming trajectories and taking back the future. Consider this a clarion call for all of us to do what we can to safeguard our fertility, the fate of mankind, and the planet. Part 1. The Changing Landscape of Sex and Fertility. 1. Reproductive shock. Hormonal havoc in our midst. The Spermageddon Scare. In late July 2017, it seemed as if every media outlet around the globe had become obsessed with the state of human sperm counts. Psychology Today cried, "Going, gone? Human sperm counts are plunging," while the BBC declared, "Sperm count drop could make humans extinct," and the Financial Times announced, "Urgent wake-up call for male health as sperm counts plummet." A month later, Newsweek published a major cover story on the same subject: Who's Killing America's Sperm? By the end of the year, my scientific paper, Temporal Trends in Sperm Count, a systematic review and meta-regression analysis, which sparked these stories, and hundreds of others around the world, was ranked number 26 among all referenced scientific papers published worldwide, according to Altmetric's 2017 report. This truly was the drop heard round the world. These days, the world as we've known it feels as though it's changing at warp speed. The same could be said for the status of the human race. It's not only that sperm counts have plummeted by 50% in the last 40 years, it's also that this alarming rate of decline could mean the human race will be unable to reproduce itself if the trend continues. As my study collaborator Hagai Levine, MD, asks, what will happen in the future? Will sperm count reach zero? Is there a chance that this decline would lead to extinction of the human species? Given the extinction of multiple species, often associated with man-made environmental disruption, this is certainly possible. Even if there is low probability for such a scenario, given the horrific implications, we have to do our best to prevent it. This is especially worrisome because the sperm count decline that's occurring in Western countries is unabating. It's steep, significant, and continuing, with no signs of tapering off. As Danish researcher and clinician Niels Skakebæk, MD, who was the first person to alert the scientific community to the role of environmental factors in sperm decline, said, "It's an inconvenient message, but the species is under threat, and that should be a wake-up call to all of us. If this doesn't change in a generation, it is going to be an enormously different society for our grandchildren and their children. Indeed, if the decline continues at the same rate, by 2050 many couples will need to turn to technology, such as assisted reproduction, frozen embryos, even eggs and sperm that are created from other cells in the laboratory, yes, this is actually being done, to reproduce. A dystopian future? Some of what we've been thinking of as fiction, from stories such as The Handmaid's Tale and Children of Men, is rapidly becoming reality. In the winter of 2017, I presented my sperm decline findings at the One Health, One Planet conference, which focused on the interconnected health of different species on the planet, the damage being inflicted by our mad industrialization of the environment, and its devastating effects on frogs, birds, polar bears, and other species. After presenting the results of our analysis, which were shocking enough to the audience, I spoke for the first time about what sperm decline could mean for Homo sapiens. That night, I awoke from a dream, feeling incredibly anxious as I suddenly realized the full implications of the story I'd put together. That given the declines in sperm count and testosterone levels, and the increases in hormonally active chemicals that are being spewed into the environment, we really are in a dangerous situation for mankind and world fertility. This was no longer only a matter of scientific study for me. I felt and remain genuinely scared by these findings on a personal level. In some ways, the picture looks even worse when you delve deeper because it's not just an issue for men. Women, children, and other species are also having their reproductive development and function commandeered in a dysfunctional direction. In some countries throughout the world, including the United States, a massive sexual slump is underway due to declines in people's sex drives and interest in sexual activity. Men, including younger guys, are also experiencing greater rates of erectile dysfunction. In animals, there have been changes in mating behavior, with more reports of male turtles humping other male turtles, and female fish and frogs becoming masculinized after being exposed to certain chemicals. Taken together, these trends are causing scientists and environmentalists to wonder, how and why could this be happening? The answer is complicated. Though these interspecies anomalies may appear to be distinct and isolated incidents, the fact is that they all share several underlying causes. In particular, the ubiquity of insidiously harmful chemicals in the modern world is threatening the reproductive development and functionality of both humans and other species. The worst offenders? Chemicals that interfere with our body's natural hormones. These endocrine-disrupting chemicals, EDCs, are playing havoc with the building blocks of sexual and reproductive development. They're everywhere in our modern world, and they're inside our bodies, which is problematic on many levels. Here's why. Hormones, particularly two of the sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone, are what make reproductive function possible. Both the amount of each hormone and the ratio between these hormones are important for both sexes. The sweet spots for these ratios are different for each sex. Depending on whether you are a man or a woman, your body needs optimal amounts of estrogen and testosterone, not too much or too little of either one. To make it more complicated, the timing of their release can alter reproductive development and functionality. And the transport of hormones can be an issue as well. If they don't get to the right place at the right time, essential processes such as sperm production or ovulation won't be set into motion. Endocrine-disrupting chemicals, as well as lifestyle factors, including diet, physical activity, smoking, and alcohol or drug use, can alter these parameters, sending levels of these crucial hormones in the wrong direction. High-altitude worries. Another, no less important or complicated question is, what do these reproductive changes mean for the fate of the human race and the future of the planet? It's not just a matter of survival, whether humans will continue to be able to reproduce or whether the human race will die out in a children of men type scenario. These issues have subtler, more personal consequences as well. Take declining sperm counts. Statistically, this phenomenon goes hand in hand with many other problems for males, including an increased risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and premature mortality. You'll learn more about these downstream health hazards in Chapter 8. And again, this isn't just about men. Not only is women's fertility being affected, even if less obviously or dramatically, but sperm quality can be altered by changes that occur when male fetuses are in the mother's womb. At that time, the fetus is affected by the mother's choices and habits, which means that women can serve as conduits for potentially harmful chemical exposures. Contrary to previous belief, the womb does not protect the fetus against chemical assault, and a developing fetus has few defenses against the infiltration of chemicals. Looked at another way, the most important events in a male's life, in terms of sexual and reproductive development, occur while he's still in utero. Babies and children are more vulnerable to these chemical assaults than adults, but those who are most vulnerable haven't been born. The sperm decline signals changes that affect everybody. As some population experts and scientists put it, a demographic time bomb is on the horizon. Future generations won't be able to meet the financial and caretaking needs of an ever-increasing number of older adults and retired workers, given the declining fertility rate. And the changes in sexual development taking place all over the world appear to have been accompanied by an apparent rise in gender fluidity, which is not a negative development, in my opinion. The point is, human sexuality and society are in flux, and this flux affects us all. It's as if the snow globe has been shaken, altering the reproductive landscape inside, only this is happening in real life. What comes to mind when you see a reference to the 1% effect, a common phrase in the cultural lexicon? Most people think of socioeconomic status, namely a ranking in the top 1% of wealth in the United States. Not me. I think of the fact that the rate of adverse reproductive changes in males is increasing by about 1% per year. This includes the rates of declining sperm counts and testosterone levels, increasing rates of testicular cancer, and the projected worldwide increase in the prevalence of erectile dysfunction. On the female side of the equation, miscarriage rates are also increasing by about 1% per year. A coincidence? I think not. Questioning the issues. If you're skeptical about all this, that's fair enough. I used to be too. Whether it's because I'm a trained scientist or a natural-born skeptic, I've always been a firm believer in Albert Einstein's assertion that blind belief in authority is the greatest enemy of truth. That axiom has underscored all of my research on environmental influences on human health, including the effects of endocrine-disrupting chemicals, water contamination, and drugs, as well as my interpretation of other people's research. So when the British Medical Journal published a study in 1992 that claimed worldwide sperm counts had fallen significantly in the previous 50 years, which was a major bombshell, I found the issue intriguing, but I had significant doubts about the validity of the results. After reading and rereading what came to be known as the Carlson paper, named after lead author Elizabeth Carlson, I was among the skeptics who questioned the methodology and the selection of samples, and I thought of many potential biases that might have distorted the findings. Granted, I was hardly alone. Numerous critiques and editorials ensued. But the findings of that study were so important from a public health perspective that I couldn't put them out of my mind, even though I was busy doing research about the risk of birth defects and miscarriage from solvents in drinking water. Doubtful as I was about the findings of that particular study, I knew that certain environmental chemicals could be decreasing sperm counts, so I wanted to investigate. It felt like a bit of a detective case. In 1994, I was appointed to the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Hormonally Active Agents in the Environment, and soon after, I was asked to tell the committee whether the Carlson paper's conclusions were justified. For 6 months, I combed the literature to find all the criticisms that had been raised about the paper. Then I reviewed the 61 studies the Carlson team had included in its analysis to try to address those criticisms. Particular questions I pursued included, did the early studies include healthier, younger men than the later ones did? Did the later studies include more smokers or obese men, which would create a distorted picture of what was happening? Had the method of counting sperm changed over 50 years in a way that made more recent sperm counts lower? To get to the bottom of this mystery, I found 2 colleagues, Laura Fenster and Eric Elkin, who were willing to help me. The results were utterly astounding. After 6 months of data crunching and considering potential biases and confounding factors, our overall conclusion agreed almost exactly with that of the Carlson team. Because we'd accounted for the geographic location in the various studies, we found that sperm counts really were declining in the United States and Europe. But what about the rest of the world? After these findings were published in 1997, I felt that we needed to ask whether sperm counts were different in different locations, since that would point to environmental factors at play. I've spent the last 20 years basically trying to answer that question. After conducting many more studies on semen quality, sperm decline, and related factors, I feel that I have. Not only have I shifted from being dubious to being utterly convinced that a dramatic decline in sperm counts is occurring, I've also discovered that various lifestyle factors and environmental exposures may be acting in tandem or in a cumulative fashion to fuel the decline. Fast forward to the summer of 2017, when my latest paper on this subject, written with my colleague Hagai Levine and 5 other committed researchers, went viral. The news my colleagues and I reported in our meta-analysis: between 1973 and 2011, sperm concentration, the number of sperm per milliliter of semen, dropped more than 52% among random men in Western countries. Meanwhile, the total sperm count fell by more than 59%. We came to these conclusions after examining the findings from 185 studies involving 42,935 men that had been conducted during this 38-year period. To be clear, these men weren't selected based on their fertility status. They were everyday Joes and Johns, ordinary men. Given that the findings pertain primarily to Western countries, this may sound like a first-world problem, but it's not. Rather, I suspect that societies in which people are likely to begin having children at a younger age are less likely to be affected by the fertility-damaging effects of environmental chemicals and life stressors. In our meta-analysis, there were much less data on sperm counts from men from South America, Asia, and Africa. However, more recent research reports declines in those regions as well. Taking this personally, what does all this mean in relatable terms? When people hear about these threats to their fertility, it's a big blow to their egos, their sense of potency, and their confidence in being able to sustain themselves as a family, a culture, and a species. It's startling and chilling when you realize that the number of children you may be capable of having is slightly less than half of that your grandparents could conceive. It's also shocking that in some parts of the world, the average 20-something woman today is less fertile than her grandmother was at 35. The precipitous drop in sperm counts is an example of a canary in the coal mine scenario. In other words, the sperm count decline may be Mother Nature's way of acting as a whistleblower, drawing attention to the insidious damage human beings have wrought on the built and natural worlds. Which leads to a third crucial question about all this. What can we do about the problem? There are steps we can take both as individuals and as a society to stay healthy and protect our sexual development. But the first thing we have to do is learn more about the nature of these problems. Most people outside the scientific community are totally unaware of these disturbing trends, and as a researcher who is committed to identifying environmental causes of reproductive health problems, I feel it's my duty to draw attention to them. Whether it's through our lifestyles or the chemical contaminants we've brought into the world, we, as human beings, have inadvertently unleashed these problems. At this rate, it's hard to know what the future will look like unless we take conscious and considered steps to protect ourselves and curb the chemicals that are infiltrating our daily lives. The time has come for us to stop playing Russian roulette with our reproductive capacities. 2. The diminished male. Where have all the good sperm gone? A date with donation and destiny. Mondays tend to be slow and quiet days at the Fairfax Cryobank in Philadelphia, especially compared to Fridays. On Fridays, men between the ages of 18 and 39 are often booked back-to-back for one of the 2 private rooms, where the recommendation is bring what you may need, as in porn, to engage in the act of sperm donation. There's a simple reason Mondays aren't as busy. Men who are donating sperm are advised to abstain from sexual activity for 72 hours to set them up for an optimal sperm sample. Abstinence affects the concentration and volume of a sperm sample, and not many men are willing to do that over the weekend. We want to see good quality specimens, and with about 72 hours of abstinence, most guys will have the best percentage of motile sperm, explains Michelle Oddie, Ph.D., Laboratory Director and Director of Operations at the Fairfax Cryobank. Sometimes they have it, and sometimes they don't. They're not always good at listening to our advice about the abstinence hours. Sperm have always been a precious commodity, given the critical role they play in generating new life. Even a relatively small change in the typical sperm count has a substantial impact on the percentage of men who will be classified as infertile or subfertile. It's not just about the number of sperm, however. Certain qualities, including the movement patterns of these little swimmers, are also essential for them to be able to wiggle upstream to meet the egg of their dreams. After a man starts producing sperm during early adolescence, he's at continuous risk for potential harm to his swimmers, a vulnerability that lasts for the rest of his life. That's because spermatogenesis, the production of sperm, which occurs in the seminiferous tubules that form the bulk of each testicle, starts in early puberty, when a boy is 10 to 12 years old, and continues throughout his life. In a healthy, fertile man, the testicles produce 200 million to 300 million sperm cells per day, only about 50% of which become viable sperm. It takes about 65 to 75 days for sperm to mature, and a new cycle of sperm production starts approximately every 16 days. When the sperm mature, they leave the tubules and enter the epididymis, a coiled, tubular organ that's attached to the testicles. Here, the mature sperm learn to swim and fine-tune their environment. Mature sperm resemble microscopic tadpoles. They have an enzyme-coated head, a tail, and a thinner portion of the tail called an endpiece. Once inside the epididymis, mature sperm wait to be ejaculated into the vagina, or somewhere else, not unlike the scene depicted in Woody Allen's film Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, where the sperm are waiting to parachute out of an aircraft and complete their mission. On average, each time a man ejaculates, he releases 2 to 6 milliliters, about a teaspoon, of semen, which contains as many as 100 million sperm. Even the healthiest, best-shaped sperm don't pause to ask for directions. A relatively small percentage of sperm will swim in the right direction, as in toward a beckoning egg. If the man doesn't ejaculate, the sperm will die and get reabsorbed by the body. The reality is, sperm tend to live fast and die young. Sperm 101. The study of sperm began in a fairly bizarre fashion. In 1677, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch tradesman and self-taught scientist who was fascinated with microscopes, collected his semen after having sex with his wife and examined it under a microscope. He saw millions of tiny, wriggling shapes that he called animalcules, little animals, swimming in the fluid. He believed that each sperm contained a miniature, preformed human being that would unfurl and develop inside the mother after being nourished by the female egg. That theory was obviously debunked long ago. But what van Leeuwenhoek saw under the microscope is the same as what we see today when examining a magnified semen sample from a fertile male. A healthy sperm cell is made up of a torpedo-like head that contains DNA, a middle section that's packed with energy-providing mitochondria, and a relatively long tail that propels the sperm forward. Each sperm is minuscule, roughly 0.05 millimeter or 0.002 inch long, much too tiny to be seen by the naked eye. In the scientific world, research protocols often change over time, but when it comes to counting sperm, the method endorsed by the World Health Organization hasn't changed much since the 1930s. Sperm are still counted using the hemocytometer, an instrument that was invented in 1902 by French anatomist Louis-Charles Malassez and originally used to count blood cells. The device consists of a thick glass slide with a rectangular indentation that creates a chamber that contains a laser-etched grid of perpendicular lines. To evaluate a man's sperm concentration at a sperm bank or another lab, a drop of semen is placed on a slide and examined under a microscope, and a trained technician counts how many sperm are within a square on a grid pattern. In human beings, normal sperm concentration ranges from 15 million to greater than 200 million sperm per milliliter or per millilambert of semen. The World Health Organization has officially deemed a concentration of fewer than 15 million per millilambert to be low. But according to a much-cited Danish study, men with a sperm concentration of less than 40 million per milliliter are considered to have an impaired likelihood of conceiving. My own research found that in 1973, the average man in Western countries had a sperm concentration of 99 million per milliliter. By 2011, it had fallen to 47.1 million per milliliter. But we'll come back to that shortly. For fertility, it isn't just the number of sperm that matters. It's also about the sperm's shape and how they move. That is, are they able to swim in a way that suggests they're likely to be able to reach and penetrate an unfertilized egg? If sperm are swimming in a circle, what's called non-progressive motility, that's not good. It's the equivalent of revving your car's engine in neutral. You're not going to get anywhere. If they're not moving at all, but instead are hanging out like couch potatoes with hangovers, that's a problem too, since such immobility tends to persist. Sperm that move too slowly or sluggishly, with a forward progression of less than 25 micrometers per second, simply aren't going to get to their intended target. What's considered normal or acceptable motility varies considerably among species. A man must have total sperm motility of greater than 50% to be considered normal in this respect. By contrast, to pass a soundness exam for breeding, stallions are recommended to have greater than 60%, and dogs should have greater than 70% progressively motile sperm. The parameters that are used to evaluate sperm quality under a microscope include concentration, how densely sperm are packed in a unit volume of semen, vitality, the percentage of sperm that are alive, motility, the sperm's movement or swimming ability, and morphology, the size and shape of sperm. All of these metrics matter, and based on recent evaluations of these elements, the quality of human sperm is going down as well as the quantity. Aside from a complete absence of sperm, called azoospermia, no single sperm parameter can predict that a man will be completely infertile, though they're all related to the chances of successfully achieving a pregnancy. The standard Big Three, sperm concentration, motility, and morphology, are routinely used to assess semen quality and fertility. Studies have found that when reproductive medicine clinicians examined the three major measures of semen quality in approximately 1,500 men, a little more than half of whom were fertile and slightly less than half of whom were infertile based on these sperm parameters, all three parameters mattered in identifying the infertile men. But there was an additive effect. When any one of the measures was in the infertile range, the man was about twice as likely to be infertile as a man with none of these measures in the infertile range. When any two of the measures were in the infertile range, he was 6 times more likely to be infertile, and when all three measures fell in the infertile range, his chance of being infertile was 16 times higher. Giving at the office. When a man donates to a sperm bank, his sperm need to meet certain benchmarks, only one of which relates to the sperm count. Sperm banks, whose specialty is, of course, collecting viable sperm in mass quantities, are facing mounting challenges across these different criteria. In a study published in 2016 involving 9,425 semen specimens from nearly 500 men, researchers found a significant decline between 2003 and 2013 in sperm concentration, motility, and total count among young adult men who were attending or had recently completed college in the Boston area. While 69% of the aspiring sperm donors made the cut in 2003, only 44% did in 2013. This was true despite that the more recent group of guys had improved lifestyle variables, such as a decline in alcohol use, smoking, and body weight, and an increase in steady exercise. Similarly, in a recent study involving potential sperm donors ages 19 to 38 throughout the United States, researchers examined more than 100,000 semen specimens and found a decline in total sperm count, sperm concentration, and motile sperm between 2007 and 2017. Downward trends are occurring in other countries, too. In China, for example, among young men who applied to be sperm donors at the Hunan Province Human Sperm Bank of China, the percentage of qualified donors dropped from 56% in 2001 to 18% in 2015, a two-thirds decline. By any criteria, sperm just aren't doing well these days, and most men don't even realize this. While the Fairfax Cryobank has experienced an increase in sperm donors in recent years, thanks to its expanded recruitment efforts, the sperm bank has seen a drop in sperm count and motility among freshly donated sperm samples. Before being suitable for use in intrauterine insemination, IUI, or in vitro fertilization, IVF, donated sperm must undergo a washing process, often involving centrifugal force, not to make the sperm shiny and polished for their big date with an egg, but to remove chemicals, mucus, and non-swimming sperm from semen and to separate sperm from the seminal fluid. After the wash, sperm are placed in vials. Since I started working here in 2006, we have seen a decrease in the number of vials per sperm sample that we're able to get, by about half, Dr. Roddy says. This is especially significant because most sperm samples are frozen for later use. They literally are frozen in time, and approximately 50% of the healthy, motile sperm cells that are collected in a sample and frozen won't survive the freeze-thaw process. They'll die. Yet, while the supply of high-quality sperm is declining in some parts of the world, the demand for healthy, viable sperm has increased. The rising rates of abnormal and inadequate sperm volume are certainly playing a role, but another big driver is the uptick in requests from different demographic groups. In particular, more single women and same-sex couples are looking to have children, and they need high-quality sperm to achieve their goal. Prospective parents could use sperm from a friend or family member, often referred to as known donors, and some do, but for obvious reasons, this can be emotionally fraught. The other option is to use a strictly screened stranger's, an anonymous donor's, sperm through a sperm bank or fertility clinic. And that's where the demand is highest. In 2018, the global sperm bank market was valued at $4.33 billion. It's expected to reach $5.45 billion by 2025. A widely touted estimate is that 30,000 to 60,000 children are conceived through sperm donation each year in the United States alone. Playing the infertility blame game. Why do these sperm supply and demand details matter? Because beyond the doomsday scenarios that garner headlines, all too often the psychological and medical burdens of dealing with fertility issues have been placed squarely on women's shoulders. Not only is this incorrect on the most basic level, given that it takes viable sperm as well as a healthy egg to create a pregnancy, it's especially wrong now, when a high proportion of infertility issues can more clearly be placed at men's feet. Admittedly, only recently have scientists and medical professionals begun to appreciate the extent to which fertility depends on the health and environment of both the male and the female partner, as well as the interactions between them. Historically, fertility has been a concept applied only to women. One reason is that demographers have traditionally defined the fertility rate as the average number of live births per woman of reproductive age. It's widely known that a woman loses precious eggs as she gets older, and as a result, constant reminders appear in the media and elsewhere about the worrisome ticking of women's biological clocks and the impact that certain lifestyle practices can have on fertility. Many women are aware of these realities, and some feel pressure to settle down and have babies by a certain age. Men? Not so much. The recent decades have seen a substantial change in perspective, at least in the scientific community, as it has become increasingly recognized that men contribute to a greater proportion of infertility cases than previously believed. Male reproductive issues are currently thought to cause approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of infertility cases, equal to the proportion of female reproductive challenges. The remaining cases of infertility stem from a combination of male and female factors. Perhaps a woman is slightly subfertile because she has irregular ovulatory patterns, for example, and her male partner is also a bit subfertile due to reduced sperm motility, so they have trouble conceiving. But if either was with a partner who was incredibly fertile, yes, some people really are, getting pregnant wouldn't be as challenging. The fertility literacy gap. Despite these realities, most men are unaware that the quality of their sperm can affect their chances of successfully conceiving a pregnancy. If they ejaculate plenty of semen, they think they're good to go, which isn't necessarily true. A 2016 Canadian study found that while most of the 701 participating men considered themselves to be at least somewhat knowledgeable about male reproduction and fertility, many were unable to identify risk factors, such as obesity, diabetes, alcohol consumption, and high cholesterol, that are associated with male infertility. In general, men have a no-problem attitude toward conception. They simply assume that if they want to have children, they'll be able to impregnate their partner easily enough. But that isn't always the case, especially in our modern world. As an example, consider Megan and James, former multi-sport college athletes who are still physically fit. They believed it would be a cinch for them to get pregnant when they were ready to start a family. It wasn't. Megan, 34, a nutrition consultant, and James, 32, a banker, tried to conceive for a year without success, at which point they both began to question her fertility status. So Megan went to her OBGYN and had a battery of physical examinations and blood tests that indicated everything seemed to be A-OK. When James subsequently went to a urologist for a comprehensive checkup, he discovered that his sperm count and motility rate were slightly low, and that he had a narrowing of the pathway through which semen travels before being ejaculated. James felt blindsided by the news, especially because he'd always thought of himself as a super healthy, virile man. When the urologist asked about James's lifestyle habits, most of which were pristine, he learned that James would relax in a hot tub or steam room after playing squash or working out 4 or 5 times per week. The urologist advised him to eschew these hot environments because severe heat is known to be toxic to sperm. After steering clear of these hot spots for several weeks, James and his wife conceived on their own. Naturally, they were thrilled, but James was left feeling flummoxed. How could he have had this sperm flow problem all these years without knowing about it? Why hadn't anyone ever told him that frequent exposure to heat could harm his swimmers? Women receive lots of information about how to prepare their bodies for making a baby. Why don't men? James asked. As James discovered, it's not unusual for men to have no clue that there's a problem with their sperm or its transport system until they try to make a baby. This happened to Daniel, 40, and his wife, Laura, 35, who spent a year trying to conceive, to no avail. After they both had tests done, Daniel was diagnosed as infertile because his sperm were abnormally shaped. Few had all the component parts. This was at least partially caused by a condition called varicocele, an enlargement of the veins in the scrotum, which can decrease sperm count and reduce sperm quality. When the doctor said I would probably never have kids of my own, I was devastated, recalls Daniel, an attorney. I still have no idea why or how I could have had this condition without knowing it. But he wasn't willing to give up hope, so he underwent a procedure to correct the varicocele, which improved his semen and sperm quality over the subsequent 6 months. The couple now have 4-year-old twins. Down for the count. Given the declines in sperm counts and other measures of sperm quality in Western countries, men's share of infertility cases may be on the rise. A recent study involving patients presenting for care at infertility centers in New Jersey and Spain found that the proportion of men with total motile sperm counts greater than 15 million per millilambert had declined approximately 10% between 2002 and 2017, which suggests a notable drop in sperm counts even among subfertile men. An unfortunate form of double jeopardy. The implication is that subfertile men may be becoming even more subfertile. The ratio of intracytoplasmic sperm injection, ICSI procedures, which involve injecting live sperm directly into a human egg, to all IVF procedures has been increasing in many countries. This could suggest that male factor infertility is increasing, according to Danish researcher and clinician Niels Skakebæk. The use of ICSI, available since 1991, has more than doubled from 1996 to 2012 among fresh IVF cycles in the United States. One of the major gifts ICSI has provided is that it has brought male factor infertility out of hiding and allowed it to be treated as a medical problem rather than a manhood issue. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization's reference value for the lowest sperm concentration that's compatible with fertility, meaning it takes less than a year for a man and his partner to achieve a pregnancy, has declined over the last 30 years. Clinicians tend to use this number as a cutoff when deciding whether to send a man for a complete fertility workup. The point is, our idea of what's a good enough sperm concentration has actually gone down. It used to be 40 million per millilambert, then it was lowered by the WHO to 20 million per millilambert in 1980 and to 15 million per millilambert in 2010. For the sake of comparison, back in the 1940s, 60 million per millilambert was considered an adequate sperm count. These changes can have unintended consequences. On the upside, this lower cutoff eases the burden on fertility clinics and might make men with relatively low sperm concentrations, by previous standards, feel better. But it doesn't do them any favors in terms of their fecundity. And if men are told their sperm concentrations are fine, they're more likely to wait until they're older to try to impregnate their female partners, and their older age could make it even harder for them to achieve a pregnancy. While it's not widely acknowledged, women aren't the only ones to undergo an age-related decline in fertility. Several sperm parameters decline with advancing age, with the most marked changes being a loss of volume of sperm, a decrease in motility, and an increase in DNA fragmentation, the presence of abnormal genetic material within the sperm. Basically, declines in sperm quality and quantity make every aspect of fertility harder as men get older. In recent years, the WHO has made similar reductions in the reference values for sperm motility, volume, vitality, and morphology. All of these factors are correlated with fertility. If a man has a low sperm count, he's more likely to have sperm that don't swim well or have the right shape. And keep in mind that, even in a best-case scenario, with a healthy adult man who has tens of millions of sperm per ejaculate, very few, perhaps only 1 in a million, will succeed in connecting with the egg. Still, every little drop in sperm quantity or quality potentially reduces the chance of conceiving a pregnancy. As the song "Every Sperm is Sacred" from Monty Python's The Meaning of Life goes, every sperm is sacred. Every sperm is great. A cluster of unfortunate events. A hidden player in the men's infertility picture that often goes unrecognized: low testosterone. As previously mentioned, testosterone levels have been declining by 1% per year since 1982, according to research from the United States and several European countries. In the male fertility foiling equation, this makes sense, since adequate testosterone is needed to produce healthy sperm, and many of the factors that can lower sperm count can affect male hormone levels too. They're parallel manifestations of a common source of disruption. Given this testosterone decline, it's not surprising that the use of testosterone replacement therapy has increased fourfold among men between the ages of 18 and 45, and threefold among older men in the past 10 years. After all, many men are aware that low testosterone levels can set the stage for muscle loss, increased abdominal fat, weakened bones, and memory, mood, and energy problems, symptoms many men desperately want to avoid. However, many don't realize that low testosterone often correlates with a lower sperm count. Here's the surprising, counterintuitive fact of life. Testosterone replacement therapy comes with its own downsides, including, wait for it, lowered sperm count. Here's how this happens. When a man wears a testosterone patch or applies a testosterone gel, the hormone enters his bloodstream and his testosterone levels go up. Sounds good so far, right? But his brain interprets this rise as a sign that there's plenty of testosterone, so it sends signals to the testes to stop making more. This in turn causes a decline in sperm production. The result can lead to something of a vicious cycle, in which men with low testosterone and low sperm quality opt for testosterone treatment and end up with even lower sperm quality. In fact, testosterone replacement therapy has been studied as a method of birth control because 90% of men can have their sperm counts drop to 0 while they're on it. When bad habits go up, guess what doesn't? Adding to these sexual frustrations, increasing numbers of younger men are grappling with a problem that's long been thought to be an older man's affliction: erectile dysfunction, ED. Believe it or not, 26% of men who present with some degree of ED are now under age 40. In a study that evaluated nearly 800 men seeking help for the first time for erectile dysfunction, researchers found that the average age at which men sought medical attention for not being up to the task dropped by 7 years between 2005 and 2017. Whether it's due to unhealthy lifestyle factors such as smoking, heavy drinking, or drug use, higher rates of anxiety, or an increase in porn consumption, which can deplete dopamine reserves due to overstimulation, the result can be the same: trouble getting or keeping an erection during real-life sexual intercourse. In addition, preliminary evidence suggests that exposure to certain environmental agents, such as pesticides and solvents, as well as arsenic in well water, can compromise erectile function. Add these to the list of sexual hazards in the modern world. Hard truths, painful emotions. Despite the fact that the decline in sperm counts presents a formidable threat to men and couples alike, there's often a reluctance to accept this reality, even when men and women are aware of it. In other words, there's often a disconnect between knowing a problem exists and being willing to accept it. For example, research suggests that in many countries, male infertility remains a hidden, highly stigmatized problem, laden with feelings of inadequacy, and often spoken of derogatorily, as in shooting blanks, and it leads to feelings of emasculation, notes Marcia C. Inhorn, Ph.D., a professor of anthropology and international affairs at Yale University. This isn't entirely surprising, since historically a man's virility has been considered an integral part of his sense of masculinity. But many people have absolutely no idea that male infertility is something different from male impotency, she adds. For 30 years, Dr. Inhorn has conducted research on male infertility in the Middle East. In this part of the world, certain genetic sperm defects and male factor infertility problems are common and often run in families. Yet, even when their husbands are discovered to be the infertile ones, women are often blamed for the infertility, and sometimes women try to help their infertile husbands save face by claiming the infertility problem as their own, Dr. Inhorn notes. It's often done out of love. They do it because they don't want their male partners to be humiliated. Granted, it's often hard for men to come to terms with the reality that they aren't as virile as they presumed they were, even when they're presented with evidence that this is the case. In one study, researchers from the UK asked men experiencing infertility to share their thoughts and feelings about what they were going through. All characterized their desire to procreate as a taken-for-granted expectation and part of being human, so merely seeking help for fertility issues was viewed as a sign of weakness and caused them shame and embarrassment. After being diagnosed with infertility, subfertility, or having defective sperm, the men said such things as, "You almost feel as if you're not a man. You cannot do the biological thing." And, "Part of being a man is being able to produce children. When they tell you that you can't, that your semen's no good, it's like taking a bit of masculinity away from you." Or, "I know it's my fault and it's my problem, and my partner could have kids with somebody else. She's got the option, whereas I haven't got the option to do that." Sharon Covington, MSW, has spent 35 years in the field of reproductive mental health, providing specialized fertility counseling to individuals and couples in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Editor of the book Fertility Counseling, Clinical Guide and Case Studies, Covington is also director of psychological support services at Shady Grove Fertility, the largest fertility practice in the United States, with 32 centers throughout the country, and she routinely counsels men and women who experience emotional stress from their fertility challenges. While this type of news is difficult for either gender to accept, it comes as a real shock when a man finds out he has a low sperm count or other male factor fertility problems, Covington says. The surprise factor stems in part from the fact that men don't have regular wellness visits to check their reproductive function or prenatal fertility checks. Only when they have trouble getting their female partner pregnant do men find out they may have a fertility problem. Often, women who are faced with fertility challenges seek immediate support, whereas men are more likely to keep the disappointing news to themselves. Among men, it's not the kind of thing they'd ever share in a locker room or with a buddy over beer, Covington says. It becomes a very private, isolating experience. Not surprisingly, men's lack of openness about their infertility is a risk factor for experiencing depressive symptoms. Nor does it help that men with fertility problems have a significantly lower quality sex life compared to male partners who don't have problems with fertility, as one study found. When researchers from Montreal examined the content of online discussion boards for men with fertility problems, they discovered that various types of social support, including emotional and informational support, were both sought and provided by those writing on these boards. When the cause of childlessness was male factor infertility, men wrote such things as, "I'm really disappointed, and I have a feeling my wife holds me responsible for it." One guy wrote, "What I hate most are the thoughts I can't help about what people think when they talk to me. Is it pity? I'm so conflicted because I know I'd feel the same way as those people if the tables were turned." Hazards of playing the waiting game. Complicating the rising challenges to male fertility, many couples in Western countries are now waiting until their 30s to start a family. So they may not discover that one or both of them have fertility problems until they have only a narrow window of opportunity to take advantage of assisted reproductive technology, ART, such as in vitro fertilization, IVF. Since there aren't any treatments for improving sperm production in subfertile men, the only effective option is for the couple to undergo ART, which is not only expensive, but also invasive for the woman. Ready for a shocker? Male factor infertility is the only medical situation that's treated by administering a painful procedure to a woman because of a problem that afflicts her male partner. Another potential glitch. A compelling body of research shows that as men age, particularly as they reach the north side of 40, their sperm is more susceptible to mutation, which can increase the risk that their children will be born with disorders such as autism and schizophrenia or Down syndrome. A man's age also can affect his female partner's miscarriage risk. Studies suggest that for men ages 40 and older, their partner has a 60% increased risk of experiencing miscarriage compared to fathers under 30. The risk appears to be stronger for first trimester pregnancy losses, which are more likely to be chromosomally abnormal. That's right, a pregnant woman is more likely to miscarry when her partner's sperm is faulty, but neither partner may realize this. Sadly, there's no easy solution to the problem of aging sperm when it comes to the prospect of achieving and sustaining a pregnancy. Assisted reproductive technology may seem close, but it's not a panacea. In recent years, fears about declining sperm counts and concerns about the lack of preventive screening for male factor infertility have spawned the development of several at-home sperm tests that allow a man to collect a semen sample, place it in a special sperm spinning device, and get a reading of his sperm count, right in the privacy of his own home. But because they're so new, the accuracy and reliability of these home sperm count tests have yet to be determined, and they don't assess other factors, such as motility or morphology. Meanwhile, sperm cryobanking services, such as Legacy, are now making it possible for younger men to bank their potent sperm for the future in case they want to have children down the road, just as egg freezing services allow women to do their part. Contrary to public perception, fertility challenges are an equal opportunity problem between the sexes, not just a woman's issue. And the declines in sperm count and quality that are occurring in the modern world aren't helping matters. It really does take two to tango, or foxtrot, or produce a viable pregnancy and healthy offspring. The difference is, just because a man doesn't hear his biological clock ticking, doesn't mean it isn't marking time. 3. It takes two to tango. Her side of the story. Reproductive wrongs. When Margaret Atwood's novel The Handmaid's Tale was first published in 1985, people responded primarily to its disturbing depiction of women living in what might be described as a feminist's nightmare, a world in which women are under strict patriarchal and social control, forbidden from having jobs or money of their own, and assigned to various classes. From chaste, childless wives, to housekeepers, to reproductive handmaids, whose purpose is to become impregnated by the men whose homes they inhabit, so they can then hand over their babies to the men's morally fit wives. At the time, no one thought the portrayal of catastrophic declines in birth rates could be linked to toxic chemicals in the air and water. Somehow, that seemed like dramatic license on the author's part. But now the novel and the series it engendered seem disturbingly prophetic. Along with the precipitous drop that has occurred in sperm counts and fertility rates in Western countries, the rate of gestational surrogacy, a consensual version of the scenario described in The Handmaid's Tale, has steadily been increasing, about 1% per year between 1999 and 2013. This trend reflects a downturn in fertility. While the dramatic decline in sperm counts is an important factor in the fertility slump that's being seen in many parts of the world, changes in women's reproductive function are also occurring, and many have links to the same lifestyle and environmental culprits that are affecting men's reproductive status. Before I get to those, some facts are in order to illustrate the big picture. Worldwide fertility dropped by 50% between 1960 and 2015, and in some countries the decline has been even steeper. For example, between 1901 and 2014, the total fertility rate in Denmark dropped from 4.1 children per woman to 1.8 children per woman. At first glance, it's easy to attribute the decline to social trends such as women choosing to have their first pregnancy at older ages and couples' desire for smaller families. Those things undoubtedly contribute to the shift, but it's not that simple, because fertility declined at all ages during this same time period. And surprisingly, the decline in the ability to conceive a pregnancy and carry it to term, what's called impaired fecundity, was actually more dramatic in younger women. And here's the real shocker. In the first decade of the 20th century, women over age 30 in Denmark had higher fertility rates than women under 30 had between 1949 and 2014. Looked at another way, the average 20-something Danish woman today is less fertile than her grandmother was at 35. No bueno. The picture is almost as bleak in the United States, with total births per woman dropping by more than 50% between 1960 and 2016. It isn't clear how much of this baby scarcity stems from economic, educational, sociological, or environmental factors, but this much is undeniable. In 2017, the total birth rate for women in the United States was 16% below what is considered necessary for our population to replace itself over time. That's obviously cause for concern. This was true in 2017, and it's still true in the time of COVID-19. To borrow a phrase from William Shakespeare, these trends suggest that something is rotten, or at least troublesome, in the state of Denmark, the United States, and elsewhere. Indeed, there's compelling evidence that diminished ovarian reserve, DOR, a condition in which the number and quality of a woman's eggs is lower than expected for her biological age, is occurring more frequently than in previous generations, and that the risk of miscarriage, pregnancy loss before 20 weeks gestation, has been rising among women of all ages. While the recent increase in reproductive challenges among women may not be quite as dramatic as those in men, we may not be getting the full story of what's going on. For one thing, there are more studies on men's reproductive functionality, partly because, well, more medical studies are conducted on men, period. Yes, there's a gender gap when it comes to medical research, as well as in pay equity, employment opportunities, dry cleaning fees, and other elements in our modern world. As far as research on reproductive health goes, There may be an element of practicality at work here. Men's genitals are on full display, and a sperm sample can be obtained from an ejaculation that's provided by a man without too much effort or trouble. With women, by contrast, no fluid offering can reveal her reproductive potential or limitations. In women, the inner workings of reproductive capacity are more complicated and are hidden from view. For example, there's no easy way to count the number of eggs a woman has in reserve. And even if she has plenty of eggs remaining and she ovulates regularly, a woman has no way of knowing if her fallopian tubes are blocked, if her uterus is hospitable to a fertilized egg, or if the right hormones will be released in the right amounts at the right times to provide a safe haven for an embryo, until she tries to get pregnant. So gauging a seemingly healthy woman's baby-making prospects is a trickier proposition than gauging a man's. Don't know much about biology. Despite the fact that the female body is a baby's first home, many women know less than one might expect about the ins and outs of reproductive health. This isn't just an educational problem. It has real, practical implications for reproductive success. Study after study has found that fertility awareness among women is shockingly low. On average, women answer correctly 50% of questions about the causes and prevalence of infertility. Medical students fare only slightly better, typically earning a D instead of an F. In one study involving 1,000 women between the ages of 18 and 40 in the United States, 40% of participants expressed concerns about their ability to conceive, but 1/3 were unaware of the adverse effects that sexually transmitted infections, obesity, or irregular periods could have on their ability to procreate. Even more startling, 40% were unfamiliar with the ovulatory phase of their menstrual cycles, which is the only time fertilization can occur. Given the confusion about ovulation, here's a brief refresher. Ovulation occurs around day 14 in a 28-day menstrual cycle. Day 1 is the first day of a woman's period, when a surge in luteinizing hormone, LH, causes one of the woman's ovaries to release a mature egg. Though the average cycle is 28 days long, anything between 21 and 45 days is considered normal, and normal periods last 2 to 8 days. To identify when she's on the verge of ovulating, a woman can track several things. First, changes in her cervical mucus. It becomes thin, clear, and slippery like egg white right before ovulation. Or she can monitor her basal body temperature, first thing in the morning before getting out of bed, because it will rise about 0.5 degree when ovulation occurs. Or she can use an ovulation predictor kit, which forecasts ovulation 12 to 24 hours in advance, after she pees on a stick. Note that these techniques are far from foolproof as contraceptive methods. They're more useful for a couple trying to conceive. After the egg is released, it slowly travels down the closest fallopian tube toward the uterus, whose lining has been prepared for the possibility of pregnancy, thanks to increasing levels of the hormone progesterone. If healthy sperm have swum upstream from the vagina through the cervix and into the fallopian tube, one can complete its mission and fertilize the egg there. Amazingly, after sexual intercourse, sperm can stay alive in a woman's reproductive tract for at least 5 days, especially if they're protected by fertile cervical mucus. Which means a couple doesn't need to have unprotected sex on the exact day that a woman ovulates in order to get pregnant. There's a window of opportunity of approximately 3 days leading up to ovulation. Once it's fertilized, the egg travels into the uterus, and if everything goes right, implantation will occur in the lining of the uterus. If it doesn't, the unfertilized egg will pass out of the woman's body during her period. Those are the basic facts of a woman's reproductive function, and they haven't changed with the passage of time. But recent decades have seen some baffling shifts in female reproductive development, health, and fertility. Among others, there has been a downturn in sex drive among men and women of all ages, as previously mentioned. Low sexual desire is the most common sexual problem among women at midlife, affecting 69% of women over age 40, according to one study. In an unfortunate double whammy, among postmenopausal women, low libido is often tied to erectile dysfunction in their male partner. Whether these sex drive nosedives stem from stress, medication use, chemical exposures, or other factors, there's no denying that they're a bummer in the bedroom. An accelerated timetable. In an unanticipated turn of events, in some parts of the world, including the United States, girls are maturing earlier and experiencing what's called early puberty. That is to say, they experience earlier breast development and start of menstruation, sometimes before age 8. The alarm first sounded on this issue back in 1997 when a study showed that by age 7, 27% of African American girls and 7% of white girls were showing signs of breast and/or pubic hair development. The researchers found that, on average, African American girls were beginning puberty between the ages of 8 and 9, and white girls by age 10, 6 months to a year earlier than girls in previous studies. In 2006, girls in Denmark had developed glandular breast tissue, the hallmark sign of puberty, a full year earlier than girls born in the same region in 1991. Similarly, the age at which girls began getting their first period also decreased. In the Danish study, it was 3.5 months earlier in girls than in their mothers. In Japan, the onset of menstruation shifted from 13.8 years for girls born in the 1930s to 12.8 years for those born in the 1950s to 12.2 years for those born in the 1970s and 1980s. These may not sound like dramatic differences, but to the girls experiencing them, they're significant. Not many girls in elementary school are thrilled by the prospect of having to carry tampons or menstrual pads in their cartoon-themed backpacks. Girls who go through early puberty may have mood swings before their peers do, and that can lead to social isolation, depressive symptoms, and use of illicit substances such as alcohol or recreational drugs. And because these girls often look older than they are, sexual attention may be directed toward them before they're emotionally ready to handle it, all of which can lead to a premature loss of innocence. The extent to which these precocious shifts bother girls varies considerably, but being ahead of the pubertal curve is often uncomfortable, as Kate remembers all too well. After developing breasts at age 9 and getting her first period at 10, Kate experienced relentless teasing from boys at school, who often called her Brenda Starr or a brick house, referring to her well-endowed, voluptuous figure. I definitely got more attention from boys. Some of it was appreciated because I was fairly boy-crazy, but some of it was not, especially the pinching and name-calling, recalls Kate, now 45, whose daughter also went through puberty early. For me, the worst part was that I gained 10 pounds in a summer when I was 10, and my mood swings were off the charts. The only upside, as far as Kate was concerned, was that she became something of a menstrual mentor to friends who got their periods and started wearing bras after she did and sought her advice. As challenging as early puberty can seem while a girl is going through it, there are often enduring ripple effects, such as higher levels of psychological distress and body image problems as an adult. There are also potential long-term implications for a woman's physical health. Most notably, an earlier age at the onset of menstruation has been linked to an increased risk of breast and endometrial cancers because the risk of those cancers increases with the number of menstrual cycles a woman has throughout her life. Female trouble in the fertility department. Other worrisome shifts are occurring in the reproductive realm for women. After spending years or even decades trying not to get pregnant, a woman who wants to have a baby might assume she'll get pregnant quickly with well-timed, unprotected sex. But it doesn't work out that way for everyone, especially these days. The truth is, human reproduction is highly inefficient, especially compared to that of the majority of mammalian species. During a given menstrual cycle, people have, at best, depending on their age, an approximately 30% probability of conception with well-timed, unprotected sex. To be fertile, a woman needs to have functioning ovaries, a reserve of healthy eggs, healthy fallopian tubes, and a healthy uterus. Any medical condition that affects these organs can contribute to female infertility. One such condition is polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, a hormonal and metabolic disorder. It's characterized by irregular periods, excess facial or body hair, acne, weight gain, and multiple cysts on the ovaries. Fallopian tube obstructions or scarring also can occur with PCOS. Another medical problem that impacts fertility is endometriosis, an often painful disorder in which tissue that normally lines the uterus gets displaced and grows outside the uterus. Fibroids, benign growths of muscle and fibrous tissue that develop in the uterus, can also decrease the chance that a woman conceives. And there are signs that all these reproductive disorders are increasing. For example, a retrospective study of nearly 7,000 women in Canada found more than a threefold increase between 1996 and 2008 in the number of women between the ages of 18 and 24 who were newly diagnosed with endometriosis. At first blush, it's difficult to tell whether this diagnostic swell is because these conditions are occurring more frequently, or if doctors have simply become better at recognizing the symptoms and making the correct call. I suspect it's a bit of both. Astonishingly, Isabel, 32, a school social worker in New York City, didn't find out until she'd been trying to get pregnant for a year, without success, that she had stage 4 endometriosis, the most severe form. Not until she had a CT scan and exploratory surgery to investigate why she was having trouble getting pregnant was her endometriosis discovered. During the procedure, surgeons removed as much of the misplaced endometrial tissue as they could find and removed her damaged fallopian tubes. After that, Isabel was able to get pregnant through IVF and now has a 2-year-old son. She continues to wonder how or why she got endometriosis, because no one else in her family has had it. I work with 10 other women who've recently gone through fertility treatment, and we often talk about what's going on in our environment that's causing so many fertility problems, she says. Maybe there's something in the water or in our food. Who knows? In this day and age, I feel like nothing is healthy anymore. Dashed expectations. Of all the potential fertility foilers, ovulation disorders are responsible for the largest proportion of female causes of infertility, with advancing age playing a primary role. Amazingly enough, a female is born with all the eggs she will ever have, approximately 1 million to 2 million, which is far more than she will ever need. By the time she reaches puberty, approximately 300,000 eggs will remain, all but one of which are quiescent and idle during any given month. Usually, only one egg is released during ovulation, but some fertility drugs stimulate the ovary to release more than one egg, which is why fertility drugs often lead to multiple births. As the decades pass, the number of eggs a woman has in storage dwindles steadily to an average of 25,000 at age 37, then hits an even more dramatic slide, down to 1,000 at age 51, the average age of menopause in the United States. As with sperm, it's not just a numbers game, however. In addition to this age-related decline in the quantity of eggs a woman has, There's also a substantial decrease in the quality of healthy, viable eggs in her body as she approaches 40. It has always been difficult for women to get pregnant as they get older. But this didn't used to be as much of a problem because women had babies at younger ages. Now they are increasingly delaying having children. And though that may well be a good thing from a social perspective, it isn't from a reproductive one. It's ironic that when it's biologically easiest for a woman to get pregnant and give birth, many women aren't yet thinking about having a child. Unfortunately, Mother Nature